Here's some homework help for page 371. This is section 7.2 on part 1. We're going to just focus on multiplying and simplifying radicals, and then part 2 will deal with division. So this lesson, this homework will deal only with multiplication and simplifying radical expressions. So here's number 14. I want you to, as we talked about in class, I want you to take radicals like this and show them using two radical factors. And the key is picking a number that we would call a perfect square number. In other words, a number that has a perfect square root. In this case, that would divide into 200 evenly. And that perfect square root number I'm going to put in this radical that I'm calling my perfects. Okay, the 100 does have a perfect square root. And again, what I'm doing here is representing this radical using two radicals multiplied together. So if I use the perfect square root number 100, I'm going to have to multiply it by 2 in order to make 200. So the way this works is this left radical will be all perfect square numbers or terms. And this right radical will be nothing perfect. Nothing in this right radical can be simplified. Okay, so let's take a look at the variable a. It's being raised to the 6th power. Well, in class today we said that if you can take this index, which we understand it's a 2, it's invisible. Since it's a square root, there's an invisible 2 here. And 2 does divide into 6 evenly, so that means a to the 6 would be called a perfect square variable. And we'll talk in just a minute how we simplify that. Okay, now let's look at b raised to the 7th. Well, obviously 2 does not divide into 7 evenly, so the best we can do is represent b to the 7th as b to the 6th. 2 does go into 6 evenly, and then to make it equal b to the 7th when multiplied, we'll put b to the 1st underneath this right radical. This is kind of like the leftovers or the rejects. This left radical, if you do this correctly, can always be simplified. So start with the number. The square root of 100 is 10. And the way you simplify these variables that have exponents is you very simply divide. So this invisible 2 will divide into exponent 6. 6 divided by 2 makes exponent 3. And the same thing will be true for b. B to the 6th, the square root of b to the 6th is b to the 3rd, 6 divided by 2. And then the rest of my answer will be this radical that cannot be simplified. So once again, I want you to show this step. I want you to show me your two radical factors. And then that should lead you to your final answer, which in this case is 10a cubed b cubed times the square root of 2b. Okay, let's try another one. In this set of problems, you have to multiply first. This is number 18, of course. So first of all, can we multiply them? Well, they have the same root or index. They're both square roots, so that checks. And they're both real numbers, so that checks. And so when I multiply these together, I multiply what's underneath the radical. 8 times 40 is 320. And then y to the 5th times y to the 2nd is y to the 7th. When you have like bases and you're multiplying, you add the exponents together. Okay, so now my goal is to find how to simplify this radical square root of 320. And once again, it's okay in this case if you want to grab your calculator. It's probably going to make it easier. I've told you on this test you will not have a calculator available, and so for that reason I'm not going to do something like this to you. That's kind of a big number, but I'll just help you out a little bit here. The perfect square root number 64 is divisible into 320 evenly. 320 divided by 64 is 5. Okay, So the way I'm going to represent the square root of 320 is by using this perfect square root number, 64, times this non-perfect square root number, which is 5. Okay? Now, y to the 7th? Well, 2, of course, as we talked about earlier, 2 doesn't divide into 7 evenly. So the best I can do is represent this as y to the 6th. 2 does go into 6 evenly, but then I'm going to have to make this y to the 1st. So when these two multiply together, it equals y to the 7th. So my left radical, when I simplify this left radical, the square root of 64 is 8. And then to do the square root of y to the 6th, I just divide. Y to the 6th divided by 2 power is to the 3rd times the square root of 5y. All right, so that is your answer then for number 18. And once again, make sure that you show this as part of your work. What are your two radical factors that lead you to this final answer? I think I got one more. All right, so the first thing we do is multiply. This is a little different because we've got numbers outside of the radical that need to be multiplied together. And you can think of this, this has a minus in front of the radical, so you can think of this as a -1 in front of this radical. So let's do -1 times 2 first, and that's of course -2. And then we'll multiply the radicals together. So it's kind of a two-part multiplication process. The numbers outside the radical multiply together, and now the radicals themselves. And if we multiply these two radicals together, we get the cube root of 30x to the 7th, y to the 3rd. Okay? And now let's think about how we can simplify this radical. Okay, so we got the -2, and then we're going to have these two radical factors. We're going to try to simplify this cube root of 30x7y3. So let's think about 30 for a second. And looking at our perfect cube numbers, we'll just make a quick list again like we did in class today. Of course 1, and then the next perfect cube number is 8. That's 2 cubed, or the cube root of 8 is 2. 3 cubed is 27, or the cube root of 27 is 3. Well, I've already, my next perfect cube number is 64, and that's bigger than 30. So none of my numbers, 30 isn't a perfect cube number, and none of my numbers in the perfect cube list divide into 30 evenly. So that means that I'm putting all of the number 30 over in this bad group, this radical that cannot be simplified. Okay, so that takes care of 30. Now let's work on x to the 7th. Well, again, 3 doesn't divide into 7 evenly, but it does divide into 6 evenly. So again, I've got to make this equal x to the 7th, so I need to multiply by x to the 1st. Well, y to the 3rd is a perfect cube variable because 3 does divide into 3 evenly, so I'm putting y to the 3rd in this perfect radical group. Okay, so simplifying this radical, first I'm just going to bring down the -2. Simplifying this radical, the cube root of x to the 6th is x to the 2nd, and the cube root of y cubed is just y. And remember, we just brought down the -2 to multiply times all of that, and then that is being multiplied times this radical that could not be simplified. So that ends up being your answer for number 22. -2x squared times the cube root of 30x. Okay? And just because you're watching this, and I appreciate it, and I hope it helps, I hope you don't just copy this down. I hope there's some understanding, and you can work these over and over again until you really understand them well. But what I thought I would do is I just went ahead and made a list of at least through 17. There's a few that we'll save for class tomorrow, but you can pause at this time, and hopefully you've already done these. Again, don't just show me answers for homework. Make sure you show me how you got these answers. But this can provide some feedback, and if you see that you've missed them, maybe this will help you go back and make the necessary corrections. And if you don't understand how to make those corrections, come and see me here in academic support. And we will go over all these in class tomorrow and proceed on to division of radicals in the next class.